The Vietnam War and the draft called upon the citizens of the USA to go to war, willingly or unwillingly. For my grandpa, he was right at the age for entry when the draft started up. My grandpa, Noah Seuring, was drafted in March of 1964. If not for his marriage plans, he would have gone to Vietnam, but he went to the draft board and asked for a deferment and got one for 90 days. At this time, they were only drafting single men 18 to 20 years old, so he got married and thus wasn't drafted. After he got married, he started his pipe fitter apprenticeship. 2 years later, the U.S. started to draft married men without any kids. If he had been drafted then, he would have probably gone to the CB's Construct building. To keep out of war, they had a kid, exempting him from the draft. He said a lot of friends were drafted, though. When they came back, they were very different people. Didn't want to, and still don't talk about what happened. Not going to Vietnam, he served 3 of the 4 years in his apprenticeship program. He had lots of trouble working in the shop. After that, he spent 5 years learning how to weld and work with the heavy industrial side of pipe fitting. Places like powerhouses, refineries, pipelines, power plants, chemical plants, nuclear power plants, etc. When he was 32, he then was picked to go into the administrative side of pipe fitting, and he was in charge of running a welding department. The place where he worked was Commonwealth Edison. He went back to school for metallurgy and weld engineering. He worked for 20 years running the welding department. He had a total of 4 kids and paid for all of their college fees. After those 20 years, he was a mechanical contractor for 5 years. Then he retired at 55. After that, he was a consultant for 3 years for weld engineering, fully retiring after that at age 58. 4 years later, at 62, he decided to start up his own fishing business, Leaders and Lures. In his words, kind of a dull life, but also an interesting one. For the culture while he was growing up, he can remember many things. The Iceman delivering ice for the icebox, gas was only 21 cents a gallon, trains with coal created a lot of smoke in the air. The first TV shows he remembers is Ed Sullivan and What's My Line. He also remembers that when he was 14, you could ride a moped up to 5 horsepower. And while it was a big deal for my grandpa, he never got to ride one like the other kids. He rode his bike until he was 16, and that was his only mode of transportation up until then. His very first job was working for a tent and awning store at age 14, where he was paid 37 cents an hour. The first car he bought was a 1949 Oldsmobile that was only $150. His second car he bought was at the age 18, 2 years later, and was a 55 Buick, costing $525. When asked to reflect upon his life, he had the following thing to say. From 1964 to 1996, I had the best 30 years this country had to offer for a working class of people. For the American people. Business thrived, stock market thrived, unemployment was low, and the school system was sound and sturdy. No drugs and no internet. He also had something to say about the current state of the U.S. The most disappointing things I see is the public school system now. The high unemployment, the number of people on welfare and Medicaid, and the federal government getting into personal business. Also the loss of unskilled jobs to third world countries, and the lack of the federal government to manage the country. Especially now in Illinois, the corruption in the state government and how the unions control the government. Also, the use of drugs is very disappointing. In our era, in my working days, never had none of it. It was almost completely reversed from today.